Welcome to the Free Press Live, coming to you from the Free Press newsroom in Midtown Manhattan. I am Michael Moynihan, and you notice to my left, typically you see Batya Ungar-Sargon, but sitting in for her today. I think she's off at a Trump rally, maybe. We have another three-named friend, like a presidential assassin, Mary Katharine Ham. They always have three names. That's what I mean.
Yeah, and I'm just going to smile right through that comment.
All right, we got a great show today. Free Press reporter Maddie Rowley, if you've been reading the Free Press, you probably saw her in-depth investigation into sex trafficking on the southern border, which has exploded since 2021. We also have Free Press editor Oliver Wiseman, who is joining us from D.C., to talk about the Free Press editor's call to CBS to release the full transcript of Kamala Harris's interview on 60 Minutes. And she ain't here, guys, but we have a special debate because of the magic of technology between Batya Ungar-Sargon, the Trumpy, and the FP's anti-Trumpy, Joe Nocera, about Joe's Trump derangement syndrome. She might have it in a different direction, too. But first, we are 19 days from the election. Can you believe
19?
That? 19 days from the election. All right, let's
I'm sure it'll be over right away.
No, it's going to be, it'll be that day. We'll find out. Let's now take a look at what the presidential candidates have been up to lately. All right, former President Trump has been making headlines. He's always making headlines for suggesting that the military should be deployed on Election Day to control the radical left lunatics. Let's take a look at what Trump said to Maria Bartiromo, I got her name right, on Fox News.
What are you expecting? Joe Biden said he doesn't think it's going to be a peaceful Election Day.
Well, he doesn't have any idea what's happening in all fairness. He spends most of his day sleeping. I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of Election Day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
All right, that's a totally normal thing to say. And the Vice President Harris responded to Trump's comments at a rally in Pennsylvania. Have a look.
He's talking about the enemy within our country, Pennsylvania. He's talking about that he considers anyone who doesn't support him or who will not bend to his will an enemy of our country. It's a serious issue. He is saying that he would use the military to go after them. Think about this. And we know who he would target. And we know who he would target because he has attacked them before. Journalists whose stories he doesn't like. Election officials who refuse to cheat by filling extra votes and finding extra votes for him. Judges who insist on following the law instead of bending to his will.
All right. I don't know about that, but we've had 9 years of this stuff, Mary Katharine.
Yes.
Enemies of the people, the media, enemies of America, et cetera. Can I ask you to, maybe you don't want to do this. If you don't want to do this, it's fine.
Okay.
Can you put a positive gloss on this? Not a positive gloss, but give a reading, because he's very bad at telegraphing his actual message. I mean, let's be as nice as we can and then tear him apart.
Okay.
Could it possibly be that he's talking about people that might disrupt the election or might protest violently afterwards? Let's try to be nice to him first.
Okay, so let me first say, and I will do that, let me first say that it is a shame to have two candidates for the presidency, that you have to have a divining rod to find their point.
Correct.
On any given day.
Yes.
And we have to do a lot of interpretation and have seances to figure out what's going on. But I do think this was, if you listen to the full answer, which I did on Bartiromo's interview, it seems to be in the context of the idea of post-election or election day violence. All right, so if we're talking about riots in the streets of major cities, which I do not think is out of the question,
Not out of the question.
depending on the outcome
Yeah.
of the election, or in either outcome,
Yeah.
or an uncertain outcome, it is not as insane as saying what Harris is saying, which she's filling in a lot. She's doing some divining herself and filling in a lot of blanks there.
Yeah, this is
about
what he means by it, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you can be guilty of going either direction. And often with Trump, I know that he has said something cray, and also that what people are saying about what he said is going to be exaggerated. So I got to do a lot of work here.
You know, this is what makes it so hard to, talk about Donald Trump, for this past decade. I mean, I've been talking about him for a long time, and sometimes people say, "Oh, are you sympathetic? You're being very generous to him." It's like, no, he is the worst. But his critics are also terrible, and rather than dealing with what he says, they like to plump it up a little bit. And this is the case. I mean, you did have Mark Milley before. It was actually before this comment saying that Trump is an incipient fascist. Mark Esper, who's the defense secretary, saying this is hugely problematic. Byron Donaldson from Florida going on CNN and saying, no, this is no good. So people actually in Trump world, I mean, 2 of the 3 have been alienated from Trump world a long time ago, but are coming out and saying, actually, this is bad stuff.
Well, and that's always what you must weigh with him, is his tendencies are bad in many ways, and can he be tempered while in office? And a lot of people are weighing that as part of their vote. But I do think we get a little carried away with, and by the way, I will add, if we're trying to go positive for him, he has had 2 actual people try to kill him.
Correct.
And then he also, within the federal government, has had the intelligence communities and the justice system wielded in very powerful and strange and unique ways against him, right? So perhaps when he's speaking of enemies within, he's talking about actually being attacked in these real ways, which are often overlooked by anyone who is a critic of him, because they think that all those ways are justified.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to talk to Oliver Wiseman in a few about his piece about CBS, but in Ollie's piece, he does actually quote the former president saying, we should shut down CBS and take away their broadcast license. I mean, this kind of instinct that he has to reach for, this is like the anti-conservative instinct in a lot of ways, reach for the tools of government, these levers of power to exert some sort of control over your enemies. That instinct grips him far too much, doesn't it?
Yes, as does sort of like a general kindness about other strongmen / envy for what they're able to do, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm sort of becoming a one-issue First Amendment voter, many of the things he says are problematic.
Deeply so.
The problem that we always have in weighing Donald Trump is that often those in media or left of center do not weigh the threats of the other side. And as a voter who's concerned about something like this, I'm actually just weighing threat against threat, which I think the 2 of us have usually been in agreement about. I'm not looking for a politician to save me. I don't think any of them are going to align with all my values. So I'm just looking for the least sucky one. Yeah. And that's my philosophy.
The question that I have to, there's a lot of people that you and I know in the business of journalism, people that I would say that have been on the right, who became sort of never Trumpers. Right. And people who, in some cases became singularly obsessed with Trump. Those people, when you say, well, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. Let's just say that. I mean, I know who I'm voting for, and it's neither of these people, by the way. I've said this on the show. That is a choice, people. Not voting is a choice. Throwing your vote away is also a choice. It sends a message.
You have the freedom to do that.
You have the freedom to do that for now. But when people say, when you say, well, I'm maybe somewhere in the middle, and they hyperventilate and say, how could you possibly, entertain this person who says things like this, right? People that your former boss, Bill Kristol, says this quite a bit. 60-odd million people don't care about that. Why do you think there's such a disconnect between the people like, certain people in the Beltway, mostly, former Republicans, kind of Republicans still, who say, voting for this guy is voting for fascism, it is voting for an authoritarian strongman. Why don't the people that you interact with, you're from Georgia, right?
Right.
You've talked
Georgia
to
and
people,
North Carolina.
You've talked to people there that vote for Donald Trump. What do they not see?
I think they're quite a bit more pragmatic than that. This is a lesson I had to learn real hard because I am more ideological than most voters.
Correct.
And
that's actually true.
If you're trying to interpret what real voters are reacting to, you can't be as ideological in your evaluation. So that's one thing. Two, I would say I think they're working against themselves by eliminating the possibility of this, major party candidate who's been elected president once already from their minds as a possibility. It makes you unable to convince people that that's the wrong choice because you're just saying it's off the table, stop doing that. And I don't think that that is a compelling argument for people's economic situation, which is often what they're using to make their pragmatic choice.
It is. And I wonder, one thing is I wonder if Donald Trump does these things, says these things, these outrageous things, because he believes them or because he thinks they resonate with voters. And I think what you're saying in a way is that they're not particularly ideological and they kind of sort things. They don't, this is not important to them. And I wonder if Donald Trump means these things or if he thinks this projects a strength that voters and the people he sees at rallies actually like. That's what I don't know.
I think it's just sort of a political savantism.
Is that what it is?
Like he gets a feel for what might work.
He does get
and
a
then
feel.
Things come out of his mouth.
Yeah, and before we move on to the next thing, I just want to point out that the Muslim ban, I think that was the first one that I noticed, was literally a response to the crowd. He's like, oh, really? You guys are into that?
Let's
and
do
it
that.
became policy. That's how they make policy. Is like, am I hearing you? It's like judging from the crowd noise. The decibel meter is like, that's policy.
Let's choose that.
Yeah, all right.
I think voters know that they're all kind of bad.
Yes, they are.
All right, up next, we have Maddie Rowley joining us to talk about her latest story about sex trafficking at the southern border. First, here is a trailer from our series, Swing State Debates. In the latest episode, Ben Kowaller moderates a fiery debate about race in America. It's out now on the FP.com and the Free Press YouTube. You should check it out.
Is inherently one of the racist cities in the nation. Most segregated in the nation.
There are only two races in this country that face legal discrimination, and it's whites and Asians.
Why do we need to help everybody and not help the people that are here?
Would you concede on some level that 50 or 60 years of affirmative action is a form of reparations?
Hell no.
Oh, no.
Everybody else got a big check.
You would like me to bear responsibility for actions committed in the past?
No, that's what you're saying. That's not what I'm saying. I just said what I'm saying.
Rhonda's saying that if she talks about
you don't want to hear what I'm saying.
All right, now we're back. Is that me? Are we back? All right. Joining us now, we have Maddie Rowley, investigative reporter at the Free Press. She is live in D.C., right? Maddie, welcome. That's where you are? Are you in
Close,
DC?
Maryland.
Maryland?
Yeah.
Oh, we wouldn't want to offend the good people of D.C. by confusing you with Maryland.
Yeah.
All right. The article, Inside America's Fastest Growing Criminal Enterprise, Sex Trafficking. Give us a little background about, what sort of prompted you to write this article and give some people a sense of what the general premise of it is.
Sure. So this sort of materialized as I was researching for the previous article I wrote about NGOs who get billions from the federal government for sheltering unaccompanied children. And through that story, I spoke with, probably a dozen whistleblowers who worked at government-run shelters. They shelter unaccompanied children who cross the border. And from there, these whistleblowers told me we witnessed, we witnessed patterns of trafficking coming through these shelters. These kids are being released to unvetted sponsors. And we believe that, they're being released to certain areas, like in Houston. One whistleblower, Deborah White, said that she told me that 329 children were released to 2 apartment complexes side by side. And that should be a red flag for, criminal activity there. So I started digging deeper and realized that this is a whole separate story. And that's when I decided to shadow a private investigator in Dallas and see what was going on for myself, as well as to FOIA the federal government for the exact numbers of specifically children who have been labor and sex trafficked since 2021.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the stats for this increase and where those come from. Is it all federal sources, or is it the nonprofits doing this work as well?
It's the nonprofits and the federal government doing this work as well. And I think it's important to point out right off the bat that the numbers I got from the federal government, I mean, those are just a drop in the bucket of the children who were able to escape their traffickers. So I'll back up a little bit. The numbers that I FOIA'd for are the numbers for child eligibility letters. And these are legal documents given by the government to victims, proven victims of child trafficking. And these child eligibility letters allow these kids to receive medical assistance, food assistance, cash, community help wherever they have ended up. These numbers showed that, the number of eligibility letters given to children has tripled since Biden has been in office and since the borders have opened in 2021. So again, and these are just the children that have been able to escape their traffickers. And again, that includes both labor and sex trafficking. I think here it's also important to note that, when you have labor and sex trafficked, kids or, women and also males, there's often a cross victimization, which is something else I learned from my reporting, is that sometimes, a migrant is both labor and sex trafficked. So it's very difficult to bifurcate between the two. And then in regards to the statistics from Shepherd's Watch Foundation, that's the private investigator I shadowed. She works for the Shepherd's Watch Foundation. They keep their own statistics, and they track the tens of thousands of ads, sex solicitation ads, across a dozen platforms, websites, and they track those, and then they go and they try to break down and crack down on these sex trafficking rings by turning over the intel that they gather to local and state law enforcement.
Maddie, I think it was last year, one of the biggest films of the year was Sound of Freedom, right? And this is it was about sex trafficking. I think a Christian film, and it wasn't in the big mainstream theaters, but it was number one.
Large audience.
Large audience. And so this has become an issue. And then on the right, often we hear conversation about sex trafficking. And then when you get the sort of murkier precincts of the right, you hear things about pedophile rings. The question, I guess, for me is, how do you disaggregate what is real in this and what is scaremongering? Because we have heard a lot of stuff that, sometimes people, have some kind of counter, like my friend Elizabeth Nolan Brown at Reason, who says, not so much, I don't believe it. So I don't know who to believe in this. I see what happens with Central American gangs, for instance. Our friend Leighton Woodhouse, who has reported of gangs controlling the drug trade in San Francisco, the fentanyl trade. So it is not strange for me at all that this would happen. How, when you're reporting, do you kind of, when people say these things, and you have a lot of people from NGOs saying these horrible things that have happened that they've seen, how do you actually kind of verify that? And what is sex trafficking versus people who are doing it because of desperate financial situations, but they're doing it of their own volition?
Where's the moral panic line?
Yeah, that's the only thing I don't really understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly difficult to delineate, and I think that's what law enforcement is there to parse that out. But I think if we look at the instances where there has been an uptick in local law enforcement cracking down on its, a lot of it has been the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. They're most known for human trafficking and sex trafficking. So I took a look at local law enforcement arrests and stings that they've conducted all throughout the country. And I also spoke to Homeland Security investigations, and this is something they are working on very closely. They're working on cracking down on Tren de Aragua as well. So my sources comprised a mix of people who are working in the space, as well as several years of reports. The Office of Refugee and Resettlement has, there have been a number of government reports, the Office of Investigator General reports, that have stated that they need to increase the vetting for the sponsors of people these kids are released to. I mean, There was one recent report where they took a sample of 343 unaccompanied children across several shelter sites and found that 19% of children were released to their sponsor without, and the sponsor's fingerprint checks were still pending. So there, and most recently, the Department of Justice sued Southwest Keys Programs, which is a very large NGO that the Office of Refugee and Resettlement contracts with. They sued Southwest Key Programs for sexual assault. There have been multiple arrests made, employees sexually assaulting these kids. So this has been a pervasive issue. So when you look across both, government statistics, local and state law enforcement and what they're cracking down on, as well as people who are working in the space, in addition to the clear statistics that we have of the 10 million illegal immigrants who have crossed the border since 2021, it's not difficult to see and understand the pattern that human trafficking has in fact increased, and sex trafficking along with that.
Yeah, it seems to me that this is the way that the situation has manifested is obviously a combustible group of inputs here that are going to cause irresponsible and bad and dangerous situations for people. When the government, federal or state or law enforcement, is cracking down, sometimes people can say, okay, what ends up happening is they crack down on an alleged sex worker or a trafficked person, but not the higher ups who were part of that. Where do you see that line, and how does that work out on the ground?
Sorry, Mary Catherine, can you repeat that?
Sure. The question is, a lot of critics will say, okay, what happens in a sex trafficking crackdown is that the trafficked person or the sex worker is the one who's punished versus the higher ups who are sort of creating this problem. What do you see on the ground?
Yeah, and that can be true, because what happens is, and this is something I learned, while shadowing the private investigators, we have victims who have been sex trafficked who are then made to turn around and recruit themselves. So they then get embroiled in the criminal side of things, and unfortunately, that's very true. A lot of victims themselves do end up in jail for this. And that is something that that's something that I did come through in my reporting as well. That a lot of older, for example, older girls will be made to recruit younger girls and sort of show them the ropes, and then if they get arrested, they get in trouble, even though that they were victims themselves. And I think that's a big part of the issue here.
Maddie, how is this figuring in the election that is upon us in apparently a couple of weeks? That's what I'm told. I'm not sure. Is it a couple of weeks?
You don't have to vote, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to vote. But, we hear this conversation about immigration. I mean, obviously, Kamala Harris is now an immigration hawk.
Oh, huge.
She's become an immigration hawk. I haven't heard a lot about this aspect of it. You would imagine that it would come up. I mean, have you seen this come up in sort of local races in Texas, in California? It doesn't seem like a political issue at the moment. Am I wrong? Am I just missing something?
I think a lot of people are aware about it, especially in Texas, where most of this is happening. It is happening all over the country, because the gangs do move, their traffickers move the girls all around the country. Just a quick example, when I went to the motel and saw how this all worked with Shepherd's Watch, the girl from the ad on the platform said that she was based in Philadelphia, but she was, working in Texas, a new Latina girl in the city. So they move all throughout the country. And I think that, Texas obviously sees the brunt of it. The private investigator at Shepherd's Watch has recently tracked 14,000 ads in Dallas per week across these dozen or more platforms. So I think that this is absolutely something that Texans are watching. I spoke to several former Border Patrol, Ammon Blair. He's a former Border Patrol there. They're very much on top of this issue, and I think that immigration, in talking about the previous conversation you were having, I think that immigration is going to be a big issue in this election. And I think that it is top of mind for a lot of people. I mean, I track, Tren de Aragua news, and Tren de Aragua, according to the New York Post, is now wreaking havoc on New York Times. The same 20 gang members have robbed. The last 50 cases of robberies can be attributed, according to the article, to 20 Tren de Aragua gang members. So I think that this is, absolutely something that people in general are tracking all throughout the country.
Yeah, it's not a Texas issue here in New York City. We see it everywhere out in Long Island. We see it everywhere too, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Maddie, for being here, and you can read her piece over at thefp.com. Up next, Oliver Wiseman will be joining us to talk about what the heck is going on at CBS and why we should care. All right, so let's take a moment now, all of you, to go to thefp.com and subscribe if you don't. And if you don't, why don't you? What is wrong with you?
You're gonna miss it.
You're gonna miss stuff. All right, here's a video from one of our subscribers telling you why they subscribe. We'll be right back.
This is Mallory Gibson. I just graduated from Auburn University and I am a Free Press subscriber. I'm currently in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm a Free Press subscriber because it's just a place where I can not have to worry about the biases that may come along with current events. I do feel like I'm part of something bigger at the Free Press. Feel a sense of camaraderie with the rest of the subscribers. I mean, as the podcast associated with the Free Press's aptly name, I associate honesty with the Free Press. I really enjoyed the podcast episodes and articles with both Abigail Shrier and Jonathan Haidt. I think Ollie is also very fun. He has a little bit of comedy, a little bit of sarcasm. At the same time, he's very straight to the point, which I appreciate because sometimes I don't have 30 minutes to sit around and read the news in the mornings. I often get to read things that aren't in other news outlets, and I also read things that maybe I don't necessarily agree with, but I think that it's good for me to be able to see things from different viewpoints and not just the way that I see the world. And you can subscribe to the Free Press too at thefp.com.
We are joined by Free Press editor Oliver Wiseman. Thank you. A few days ago, the editors of the Free Press released a statement titled 60 Minutes released the unedited Kamala Harris transcript. Why should they release it?
It's none of your business, Ollie.
Well, it is my business, guys. As we said, there's an election coming up. Some people will tell you it's a very important election, and if we take them at their word, we deserve to know exactly how the candidates answer important questions. So maybe I should back up, though, and explain the kind of controversy a little bit that we wrote this editorial about. Kamala Harris sat down with 60 Minutes. She was asked about her relationship with Netanyahu, basically, and whether Israel was listening to the US government. She said, a clip aired on Sunday in which she gave a very long, unimpressive, waffly answer to the question, and then come Monday night, a very different answer was what she appeared to say. And so the question is, well, what did she actually say, and where did they take the slick, smooth answer from? Was it from that question, or did they just pull it from somewhere else in the interview? And we feel as though, in the interest of political transparency and also kind of accountability for an important interview, we're entitled to know, like, what actually the vice president said.
Ollie, I'm going to try to take CBS's position here, which is not something I am comfortable doing because they've been so uniquely awful recently, especially with Tony DeCouple. But let's look at it this way. You do an interview, and again, I think this is a special situation because you have a presidential candidate who's not doing a lot of interviews, particularly not doing a lot of challenging interviews. You sit down and you do 45 minutes. Say you do an hour, something like that. And it is incumbent upon the editors at CBS and at 60 Minutes to get that into a segment that's 15 minutes, right? How do you, cut that piece without people getting angry? I mean, do you believe that the first bit that you saw, which you mentioned in your piece, was quite a word salad?
Yeah.
It was the sweet green of answers. It was all over the place. So that answer makes no sense. And then they replace it with something that makes a little more sense that might be from somewhere else in the interview. I used to do this in TV, and the lawyers would always say, how far is it from the question? If it's too far, you can't use it. So, what are they supposed to do in the sense that you got to cut some stuff out, right? I mean, I think that's probably their counter argument.
Also, just apologies to Sweetgreen.
Yeah, I mean, that's harsh. Yeah, very harsh on Sweetgreen.
And the other one is.
But, well, we actually got our hands on the CBS kind of like journalism handbook when we were writing this editorial. And that has, this is an important kind of like, there are shades of gray, and in broadcast journalism, you obviously have to make these kinds of calls. But firstly, taking an answer from one question and presenting it as an answer to another is just a big no-no in their book. So if they did that, it's a clear breach. And then I think even if it's an answer to the same question, there's a question of whether you're fairly accurately representing the vice president's answer. And I think probably not is the answer. But again, we could answer. There's a very simple way of solving this, guys, which is just tell us what she actually said. Like, she was on camera. Why don't you just tell us?
And transparency is good, and transparency is especially good when you're speaking with the sitting vice president of the United States of America, right? So her words have some sort of historical significance, as much as I hate to admit that, given the words and the word salad. But it is sort of customary to have interview transcripts from presidents and vice presidents, even hosted on the White House's website, so that everyone can see what they're saying.
Well, that's the other point. I mean, even if she was just a candidate and not the vice president, her team will have recorded the interview too, just so they have a copy of it. That's kind of standard practice with these kinds of things. And so they could set their record straight too if they wanted. We asked the Harris campaign, and they, maybe you won't be surprised to hear, did not offer us the audio. But hey, it was worth asking. I know, so crazy. Rude, right? So rude. But yeah, it's strange, and I think that maybe CBS feel as though if you say yes to every request like this, suddenly every edit of every interview you do becomes a kind of debate in public. But what I would say is the bar should be higher for interviews this important. It's probably the most important interview 60 Minutes will do all year, which is right ahead of an election with a presidential candidate. So I'm not saying every senator you ever interview you need to release a transcript for, but in something that's important, I think there's a strong case for it.
And I would argue if you're a journalist and you believe in more information being better, then there's really not an argument against having it out there. You've done your job. The reporter did his job very well. Bill Whitaker.
Bill Whitaker was great, by the way. He was a very good
I'm
interviewer.
sure he would love to have it out, although he doesn't want to get decoupled.
I mean, I think the people that have the sort of the right to be most annoyed are probably a lot of the journalists associated with the interview that maybe they feel as though what they did was perfectly defensible, but they can't prove that because they can't show us the unedited version.
I think we have a right to be slightly skeptical, considering when Donald Trump was interviewed by 60 Minutes, and part of the reason he said he wasn't going to be interviewed by 60 Minutes again was Leslie Stahl, in an unguarded moment that was taped by the Trump people, that the Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation or unverified or something like that, when the FBI had it for a year at that point. Ollie, one final question for you. You do mention Trump in your piece, and you mention a tweet, or maybe he truthed it. Did that ever get into the lexicon?
I think the truths then get tweeted.
The truthing and then tweeting is this. 60 Minutes is from Donald Trump. 60 Minutes is a major part of the news organization of CBS. News organization is mysteriously capitalized. We're getting used to the weird capitalization, which has just created the greatest fraud in broadcast history. The greatest fraud in broadcast history. CBS should lose its license and should be bid out to the highest bidder, as should all the other broadcast licenses, because they are just as corrupt as CBS and maybe even worse.
Cue Elon lining up.
Yeah, I mean, Ollie, a bad bit of journalism here. I think that we can all agree on that. The response from Donald Trump is slightly terrifying, though, isn't it? It's kind of a Chavista response. Let's pull their broadcast license.
Yeah, I mean, what did you expect, Moynihan? A cool-headed and reasonable response, keeping everything in perspective. I think that's a huge overreaction, and I think reason to be worried about how Trump handles a free press and all those things. But I also would say, I think one of the things that's been really damaging for US media in the Trump era is they focus on the over-the-top response as a kind of way of like letting themselves off the hook. And so, you know, if you want more trust in the media, if you want people to take you more seriously, including Trump supporters, you know, maybe take the criticisms, the substance of the criticisms a little more seriously, and like do the work, as they say, to win back the trust of your viewers and your readers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ollie, for joining us. I do wish more journalists were interested in public trust. It's a shame. Next up, we have a debate between two free press staples, Batya Ungar-Sargon and Joe Nocera, about Donald Trump, in which Batya tries to talk Joe down from his so-called Trump derangement syndrome. This should be fun. Let's take a look.
My fellow Americans, as many of you know, there is currently a disease afflicting millions and millions of our fellow Americans. It is called Trump Derangement Syndrome, otherwise known as TDS for short. And it is a situation in which a person becomes so burdened by their hatred of the former president that it becomes an all-consuming state of being. And even here at the Free Press, within our own ranks, our beloved Joe Nocera has shared with us that he has this affliction. And so we're going to talk to him about it. We're going to find out why this disease has taken root in so many of our very dear fellow Americans, and see if there's nothing we can do to help him. Joe, thank you so much for being willing to discuss your affliction.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's an affliction, number one. And number two, I'm very happy to be here with you, my friend.
Thank you, Joe.
And just because I despise Donald Trump doesn't mean I have to despise you as well, and I don't.
I love that.
So I actually think that's something people on both sides have learned since 2016, that they can talk to each other and not hate each other, even though they hate the other side's candidates, just as you hate Kamala Harris.
I don't hate Kamala Harris at all.
All right.
I admire her greatly. I really do.
Okay.
I'm not sure she'd be a great president, but I certainly don't hate her. I really, truly admire her.
Well, I do believe that Trump is one of the worst people on the face of the earth.
Walk us through why you see him that way.
Well, let's start with his utter contempt for the rule of law. Let's talk about January 6th and his continued denial that he lost the election. Let's talk about the way he describes immigrants as vermin. Let's talk about him talking about Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating pets. Let's talk about him saying that Adam Schiff should be jailed once he wins, and that all his political opponents should be jailed. Let's talk about the way he views the Department of Justice and other parts of the federal government as his opportunities for revenge. That's the short list.
So let's start with the divisive character. You know, we're often told that Donald Trump has this uniquely divisive character and that he's a terrible person and so forth. You know, I would submit to you that his character is actually an asset in ways that I think you two would acknowledge. So let's start with what happened right after he was almost assassinated, right? Mm-hmm. His first reaction was to get up and to reassure all of his followers, the people at that rally and everyone watching on TV, that he was okay.
Okay.
I think that there are maybe 10 people on planet Earth who could survive an assassination attempt, get hit by a bullet almost to the face, and their first thought be, let me reassure the nation that I'm okay. I think he prevented a civil war on that day, because if he had gone down and been whisked off to the hospital before the nation was able to see that he was okay, I think there would have been real violence. And to me, you have to have a certain kind of character. I couldn't have done that. I don't know if you think you could have done that, but I think you have to have a sort of very high aggressive personality to be able to survive something like that. And then your immediate reaction is, allow me to reassure the people that I am okay.
Well, first of all, he wasn't reassuring the people. He was reassuring his followers, That's what he cares about. He doesn't care about the people. He doesn't care about the nation. He cares about the people who follow him and who are going to vote for him. And it was smart, it was symbolic, it was aggressive, all of that, none of which makes me think he's a good president.
Do you not think that it was important for our nation that he did that? That he reassured his followers that he was okay?
Just standing up and walking with people made it clear that he was okay. I mean, this whole thing was, it was showmanship. It was showmanship. But it's like, it was very Trumpian, and it was very aggressive. But it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not he's a good president. It just doesn't.
Right. I'm speaking to the question of character. I would say submit as well. One of the things Donald Trump did that I think you and I could agree on is he really took on a kind of neoliberal consensus that had taken hold of both parties. Is that something that you acknowledge?
I totally agree with you. I agree with you on that. That's one of the better things. That's one of the best things he did.
Right. So
and
I
going
would
after
submit again,
going after China was one of the best things he did.
I would submit,
but telling NATO but turning NATO into an extortion racket is not good.
well, I'm not asking if you like everything he did, but I would submit to you that when he took on China, he was taking on not just one party with the other party backing him, he was taking on both parties at once with no one backing him. And you like that he did that. We agree that that was really important. I would again submit that you need a certain kind of personality to be able to say, with no one behind me, I'm going to take on 95% of the politicians in this country, 100% of the political parties to do what I think is right for the American people.
Sure.
Like a person with a nice personality can't do that.
Sure, and he was also going to get rid of Obamacare. And he tried, 50 times, and he didn't do it. Why didn't he do it? Because he has no idea how to actually do politics, okay? He was right about China, and he gained consensus because he could put a tariff on. It was the right thing to do. Was it right? It was the right thing to do. But it's like a clock is right. A broken clock is right. Twice a day. And I don't think that everything he did was terrible. I don't. But I also think that many of the things he did were terrible. I know you're going to get to immigration, so we might as well just jump to it.
Before we do that, I'm just trying to argue that the things you like that he did require a kind of personality that maybe we wouldn't choose as, our best friend, or that it takes a certain kind of personality to do the kinds of accomplishments that you recognize as accomplishments.
Well, I mean, you're arguing basically that he's the only person in America who could have done this, and I don't necessarily think that's true. I think the neoliberal consensus was already starting to break down. He was in the vanguard of it, and he was way ahead of everybody else. But I just wrote a book that discusses quite a bit about the decline of the neoliberal consensus. So, I think that you can have Trump derangement syndrome and still say he's right about China or he's right about a few other things, but that his narcissistic personality, the fact that he doesn't care about the rule of law, the fact that he does some things that are just abominable, makes him unfit to be president. To me, it's that simple. He's unfit to be the president of the United States.
Let me give my last sort of argument in the divisive character category, and then we can move on to immigration.
But wait, we don't have that much time. We need to move on to other things.
Well, I would just, very briefly, he's frequently, accused of being divisive, but it's a fact that he has unified the working class in this country across racial lines in a very big way, in a way that we have not seen in many decades, if ever before. And so people call him divisive, but I would submit to you that the people he's really dividing are the elites from the working class and putting his finger on the scales for the working class.
Sure, he's not putting his scales on he is getting the working class votes because he is showing them that he can be as pissed off at the elites as they are. Has he actually done anything for the working class? Has he actually made their lives better? More factories closed in Michigan while he was president than while Biden was president. I mean, the idea that he's actually helping the working class is baloney. It's nice that the working class likes him, I suppose, but
Well, what about the fact that in 2019, the bottom 25% of wage earners saw a 4.5% wage increase, their first wage increase in 60 years, but the top 25% only saw a 2% wage increase, meaning that he was actually, the economy he had created by getting rid of this sort of neoliberal order that was an upward transfer of wealth, actually was putting money back in the pockets of the working class while keeping inflation low.
Yeah, but the wage increase for the upper class is a total misnomer, because the way the upper class made their money is not from wages, but from the increases in the stock market, which is the only thing he actually cared about. When he talks about the economy, he doesn't actually talk about the economy. He talks about the stock market. That's how we measure success. It's idiotic. And then when COVID came and the stock market crashed, excuse me, he viewed that as some kind of failure. It wasn't a failure. The stock market crashed because COVID arrived. Then the stock market went up again, and so his attitude was, well, who cares about COVID? The stock market's going back up.
Can't argue with that. I think that's pretty accurate. Let's move on to immigration. Talk to me about your objections to him on the immigration front.
Well, my primary objection is the fact that as part of the immigration policy, he separated children from their parents as a policy matter, not just an accident, not just something that happens because people come across the line. It's a policy matter. Look, I have come around, mostly because of my work at the Free Press, editing stories at the Free Press. I've come around to the idea that we have a border crisis.
Wow.
Yes, that's right. But I also believe, and this is where I think he's wrong, we should have fewer illegal immigrants and we should have way more legal immigrants. We don't let enough people in the country legally. And I know white guys like me say this all the time, but I'm going to say it because I'm going to say it. When my grandparents came here, they were dark, swarthy scum. Just as Donald Trump views Mexicans, Venezuelans, South Americans, Ecuadorians as dark, swarthy scum. And now, 2 generations later, here I am sitting with you at a Free Press microphone. So I have a lot of empathy and for the idea of letting more people in the country. And the only reason I got in the country, my grandparents got in the country, is because they came in 1918. Mm-hmm. By 1924, the country had shut down Italian, Polish, Eastern European immigrants because they were dark, swarthy scum. And we were a country consumed by eugenics. And Donald Trump believes fundamentally in eugenics. He believes in the supremacy of his own race. Now, you may disagree with that, but when I listen to him talk about immigrants, that's what I hear.
I do disagree with that. If you look at the immigration trends and you compare them with the labor trends in America, high immigration rates always correlated with worse working conditions and worse wages and worse just overall well-being of working class Americans. And lower immigration rates always correlated with higher union membership, higher wages, and better working conditions. So you look at a year like 1971, the high watermark for working class wages, and the share of the population of the United States that was foreign born was only 4%. It's like an all-time low. And those things are not accidentally correlated. It's the most basic law of supply and demand. The more you have of something, the cheaper it is, and the less you have of something, the more expensive it is. And shouldn't we as Americans, isn't there a way as Americans to say in a non-eugenics way, we want much less immigration because we want our working class to be strong and to be prosperous, to have the American dream, because we want our children to be able to go play in places and in families and with families and in parks and in neighborhoods where not just the elites, but everybody is living some version of the American dream.
Batya, I wish you were running for president because you just said it so beautifully and so elegantly and in a way that Donald Trump could never say and does not fundamentally believe. He wants immigrants out of the country because he thinks they're all killers, murderers, robbers, bad people invading towns and taking them over. And most illegal immigrants are coming to this country for a better life. Now, I'm not saying that that's appropriate because I think the Biden administration has has basically made it way too easy to say, I'm coming here for reasons of asylum because I'm afraid for my life, which is in 99% of the cases untrue. I agree with that. But, you know, in the 4 years that Donald Trump was president, it's not like union membership rose because it did?
Yeah.
Yeah? By how much?
By hundreds and thousands.
It did not.
It absolutely did, yeah.
We're going to have to fact check this after this debate, folks. But my core point is he doesn't care about immigrants because he wants the working class to get better jobs. He's anti-immigrant because he's anti-immigrant, because that's a core part of his nature.
That the most anti-immigrant group of the Democrats' coalition is black voters. Because when Donald Trump says they're taking black jobs, this is something that, you know, civil rights activists, Barbara Johnson, you know, Bernie Sanders, this is something everybody used to be able to acknowledge before Donald Trump, that they take jobs from people who are overrepresented in the working class, which means blacks and Hispanics.
Well, you know,
so to
the
call
phrase
it
black
racist, like if you're going to call black people racist, all right, I'm willing to be the kind of racist that American blacks are, I guess. Like, I'm going to stand with their interests, and this is very much against their interests. That's what they tell people.
You and I are having a fairly high-level discussion about real issues. Donald Trump doesn't do that. I mean, you've very cleverly and shrewdly, because you're smart and you're good and you're a nice person, you've moved the conversation away from the shittiness, can I say that? The shittiness of the former president of the United States, who still calls himself the president because he's a narcissist, towards you've moved it towards a much more sane conversation, for which you should be credited, but it's not going to cure me of Trump derangement syndrome because you're not speaking about Donald Trump.
Okay, so let's get to the threat to democracy, right? Which, you know,
yes, let's. Yes. Now we're talking, baby.
Are you having a good time?
I'm having the best time. Are you having a good time?
I think the viewers are too. All right. So in terms of the threat to democracy, so I don't want to downplay anything that anybody feels when they see Donald Trump, when they look at January 6th. I don't think he covered himself in glory on that day. You know, I was horrified like everybody else. I want to make 3 quick points and then have you respond to them. The first is about the Republican primary. It seems like a small point, but to people on the left like us, I think it's kind of a big deal, which is, Nikki Haley outspent Donald Trump 2-1 in that primary, and he blew her out of the water. And if you had told me before that in an American election, a politician could be outspent 2-1 and still basically clean up, I think she won maybe, I don't know how many,
20%, 14.
A tiny percentage. In that way, I think we can probably agree Donald Trump does represent the will of the electorate. The ability of the will of the people to triumph over things that I think I had thought were like sort of, I was a sort of Citizens United is the worst thing to ever happen to American politics, only to learn that actually when you're that popular and when your base feels that you've done that much for them, somebody else could spend billions of dollars trying to destroy you and it won't matter. And so I think from that point of view, it's really important to acknowledge the will of the American people being so robust, the state of American democracy being incredibly robust.
Okay, that's number one.
Number 2, people are often upset at Donald Trump for contesting the election. But, the Democrats have contested every election they've lost this century, right? They also had big problems, demanded recounts, claimed that elections were stolen. Let me just read
Which ones?
Well, in 2000, they claimed that they had won. They claimed that in 2004 that they had won Ohio, and that the reason that was not made visible was because of irregularities. And then let me just read you some quotes Let's see if you can guess who said this. Trump knows he is an illegitimate president. I believe he understands that the many varying tactics that they used, from voter suppression and voter purging to hacking to the false stories, he knows that there were just a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out like it did. I know he knows this wasn't on the level. There was a widespread understanding that the 2016 election was not on the level. We still don't know what happened, but you don't win by 3 million votes and have all this other shenanigans and stuff going on and not come away with an idea like, whoa, something's not right here.
So Hillary, I'm sure Hillary said that.
Clinton.
So what's your third point? Let's
right.
keep going, because I got stuff to say here.
All right. Third point. You might say, well, Donald Trump went far beyond what the Democrats have ever done in any of these situations. They accepted it. I would submit to you, Donald Trump vacated the White House in 2020 despite thinking that he had won. He still left. And as to how far he went, if he went so much further, if he broke the law, that is all being currently litigated in the courts. And so far, it's sort of 50-50, right? We're seeing all of this play out currently. But that's a question for the courts to decide, and they're actually looking into it. The idea that he did not have the right to pursue every legal avenue to determine whether he had won or lost, I think that's kind of a view that Democrats have convinced themselves of, despite the fact that they themselves have availed themselves of many of the same
Americans,
avenues.
presidential candidates who have lost have historically stepped down gracefully. The most compelling example is Richard Nixon in 1960, knowing
before my time.
knowing full well that Illinois had been stolen from him, and that he would have won the election if he'd won Illinois. Lyndon Johnson took care of that. Al Gore had a perfectly legitimate claim that he had won Florida. The Supreme Court ruled against him, and even though he thought it was a sham ruling, a political ruling, he, for the benefit of the country, said, I step aside, and I will let George Bush start the Iraq War, which is basically what happened. Now, here you have Donald Trump, to this day, will not say that he lost the election. And election workers are now being harassed, they're being worried, and it has been destabilizing. His attitude about it has destabilized American democracy more than anything else. And you can say it's being litigated, blah, 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 but he lost, lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit right afterwards. He would never concede, he would never contest. He basically got booted out of the White House. Obviously he had to leave. He didn't have any choice to leave. But to this day, he will not say he lost the election, and the millions and millions of Americans believe him. And it is just...
But Joe, isn't it possible he won't say it because that he's reflecting? I'm not justifying it. I think the reason he won't say it is because there's literally a fraud case that hangs on whether or not, right? If he ever admits that he lost, that fraud case...
Do the right thing for the country. That's the thing. I have to say, I know people... I know somebody in particular I'm thinking about who I said to this person, what is it about Donald Trump that you like so much? Why do you support him? And this person said, because I truly believe he has the best interest of the country at heart. And that blew my mind. Because I fundamentally do not believe he has ever had or will ever have the best interest of the country at heart. I believe he's a grifter at heart, and that's what he really... I switched from Morning Joe this morning to Fox, because I listen on the radio, on Sirius XM while I'm driving my kids to school. And I switched to Fox, and they had a commercial. And you know what the commercial was for? Trump sneakers. Oh, by the way, the first round of Trump sneakers, they've already sold out. Get them now while they're a special thing, and don't resell them, because they're going to be... And it's him. It's the guy running for president of the United States selling sneakers on Fox. Come on!
Well, on that note, Joe, did I make you feel any better?
You did, but that's because it's you.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for watching our debate. At the Free Press, we think this is so important to be able to have these kinds of conversations, and we will catch you next time.
We're going to hug after this.
All right. The sneaker bit was great. I have to say, Joe yelling about Trump sneakers. He didn't get to the cryptocurrency or the $60 Bibles, but that's next episode. That's our show for today. Thank you to Batya and Joe for that Rashomon-length debate, and to Maddie Rowley and Ollie Wiseman for joining us live. And of course, thanks to Mary Katharine Ham, MKH, the Hammer, for being my right hand this morning. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Come back Friday for the next episode of the Free Press Live. I think it'll just be me, so that's an incentive to come back. And if you haven't already, go to thefp.com and subscribe so you don't miss anything to play us out. Here's someone who does just that.
My name is Adam Kligfeld. I'm a rabbi. I am proudly a Free Press subscriber. I am in my office in Los Angeles, California. So I'm a subscriber because I trust the Free Press is committed to illumination, presenting something in all of its complexity, and I feel more educated and more intelligent after I encounter information through any of the Free Press channels. I listen to a lot of Free Press podcasts, and particularly the Honestly podcast. Just finished Barry Weiss's delicious interview with Jerry Seinfeld, and I appreciate how Barry engineered a conversation that found a way in between shtick and sobriety. Hold on, my dog's in my office right now, and he's making some noise in the background. This is Paddington, who sometimes comes to the office with me. An episode of the Honestly podcast that I particularly appreciated, where Barry Weiss interviewed Andrew Sullivan, someone whose intellect and clarity I look up to, even though I often disagree with him. I listened to that podcast 3 times. I subscribe to the Free Press, and you can too at thefp.com.